Todd Cochrane, a great podcasting pioneer, an advocate for independent podcasters, and one of my good friends, died Monday morning, September 8th, 2025. Todd was among the first 50 podcasters launching Geek News Central on October 4th, 2004, and he wrote one of the first books about podcasting, the Podcasting Do-It-Yourself Guide, published on June 10th, 2005, nearly 3 weeks before Apple launched support for podcasts in iTunes, and before I even heard of podcasting. You may never know how you touch the lives around you, and while I certainly can't tell you of everything Todd has done and given to others, I would like to share how I knew Todd. And I'll try to make it through this. Although I'd learned about Todd's company, Blueberry, sometime in 2006 or 2007, I didn't meet Todd until June 2008 at PodCamp, Ohio, in Columbus, Ohio. Todd was speaking on podcast sponsorships. I remember it well because of his answer to one of my questions back then when I knew nothing about podcast sponsorships. I asked something like, I play video games with the marketing director from this major company. What should I do to approach him about a sponsorship of my podcast? And Todd said, why haven't you talked to him yet? And the other thing that happened, I still remember this. This is just so funny. During his presentation, at one moment, he said something. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he spoke badly about Google. And right after he said that, lightning struck right outside the window where we were. And we didn't even know there was a thunderstorm coming yet. It was perfect. It was as if, the voice of God was like, how dare you insult Google? But Todd wouldn't have minded. Todd created the People's Choice Podcast Awards, the first podcast awards. Todd was also the founder of the Tech Podcast Network, of which I was a member for many years. In January 2013, I had the opportunity to attend the Consumer Electronics Show, or CES, in Las Vegas with Todd Cochrane and a team of other podcasters from Tech Podcast Network. I was a bit hesitant to go. For one thing, it was Las Vegas, and also just the expense of it and the time. It overlapped with New Media Expo, or NMX, which was also in Las Vegas at that time, so I could do both at the same time, but I just wasn't sure that even both events together were worth the trip for me. But Todd very kindly pressured me to commit to attending CES with me. He told me about all the relationships that he had built from going to CES year after year, and how much fun it was, and the opportunities there would be to network and to discover new products and all of this. It turned out that he also wanted me there to be there live at New Media Expo because Leo Laporte was hosting the Podcast Awards ceremony. And that's when the Audacity to Podcast won its first award. Of course, Todd couldn't reveal that I had won, but he was clever in convincing me to be there so that I could have the joy of receiving the award in person from one of my podcasting heroes. It was at that same conference that Steve Lee and Dave Lee shared the idea of International Podcast Day and asked me to help and be one of the co-founders. And I would not have been there if it wasn't for Todd Cochrane. Those years of covering CES provided great memories too. Todd and I partnered up several times. He would run the camera while I interviewed a company I found interesting, and I would run the camera for him when he would interview someone. We would also live stream coverage throughout the day from our Tech Podcast Network booth outside the North Hall of the Las Vegas Convention Center. I remember a funny time during the live coverage that someone brought a water-based eye massager. It looked like a VR headset, but it was for massaging your eyes, and it had water in these little pockets or bubbles or something like that on the inside. I thought it was kind of weird, and we'd seen plenty of weird gimmicks during our time there, both on the floor and people that came to the booth, but we would interview anyone who would schedule the time at the booth. So I wore contacts at that time, and while Todd continued interviewing the representative from the country, or from the company there, who was from a different country, but while Todd was interviewing him, I decided to go ahead and slip on this headset because I thought, well, yeah, I wear contacts, so I'm not sure if it's a good idea. But then again, I wear contacts. My eyes are kind of stressed. And when I slipped that on and turned it on, I actually let out a sort of sigh and moan, like, ah, because of the relief that it brought on my stressed eyes. And Todd burst out laughing, saying, I don't think we've ever had someone moan live in our coverage before. And Todd was like that. He would just roll with things. He was popular for saying that don't edit your podcast. Don't edit anything, because he said if he ever edited his podcast, it would kill him. Just he wanted to get it out there and as raw and with whatever problems it had in it. And Todd was like that, very raw, very unfiltered. But yet, he cared. Yeah, he could say some harsh things against companies and such. But then, like, at dinner or afterward, or you'd see him sitting and talking to people, laughing with people, even people that he might have ripped to shreds in some statement on X or some other social network platform or at a conference. But he was still friendly. He still cared about people, no matter their backgrounds. At the end of those CES events also, Todd would treat the whole team to dinner at Tony Roma's, a restaurant in Fremont Hotel. And that's where many of us had the best cheesecake of our lives. I will not repeat what Todd had said when we all tasted that cheesecake. But Todd was always generous like that. When we would hang out in the evenings at podcasting conferences, he would frequently buy everyone's meals or drinks at the table. At the conversations, or in the conversations at those conferences, it was always so fun hearing him tell all of these stories from his past in the Navy, and he would do so without compromising national intelligence or any of his top secret clearance or anything like that he still had. But he'd have all of these fun stories, and we would talk into the late hours about podcasting and how we could help podcasters and make the whole industry better, because Todd cared. Indeed, he cared very much about independent podcasters especially, but also the whole podcasting industry. And he was a strong proponent for anyone to be able to speak freely in podcasting. I remember him often saying something like, I may not like what you have to say, or I may not agree with it, but I will defend your right to say it. In fact, Todd was such a great supporter when I was inducted into the Podcast Hall of Fame too. And Todd was in the first group in 2015. I've been trying to find his speech from that. If I can find that, I'll put it in the chapters and in the notes for this episode, along with several other things about Todd, special landmark or hallmark episodes that he has put out, or certain pieces of content. And look in the notes and look in the chapters for this episode for those links to things. I really recommend that you check it out, see some of the things he's done, he's said, he's contributed. But when I was inducted into the Podcast Hall of Fame, I'd recently experienced an attack and defamation campaign, and there were actually some concerns about my safety at that ceremony and the behavior of the crowd as well. But Todd was very direct with me, because at some moment I was expressing some concern to him, and even some self-doubt, and saying, do I really deserve this? I don't think I do. I help podcasters, yeah, but I don't think I deserve this. And he told me, no. He said, Daniel, you deserve to be here. And he also said that if there were any hecklers during my speech and when I got the award, he would personally escort them out of the room and get them out of there. Because Todd was like that. He stood up for others. He fought for our country, too. He risked his life for our country, serving the Navy in multiple aspects. And it was also because of Todd that I started listening to No Agenda with the podfather, Adam Curry and John C. Dvorak. And listening to that podcast is what helped start my friendship with Adam Curry. And then also how I first learned about podcasting 2.0 when Adam was just formulating the ideas. Todd was known for many things, but one of my favorites was that he would often say, getyourown.com. And ironically, he was the one who owned the domain cnnpodcast.com, which is now under the ownership of the actual CNN. And it was in a conversation with him that I was joking. I said, you could call it the Cochrane News Network. But that's when CNN was demanding the domain and he had to give it to them. But he's also the owner of whatsapodcast.com, for which he recently entrusted me to make the website for it to publicize a podcast definition. And I talked about that in a recent episode. And he just said, yeah, go ahead, make the site for it. He didn't critique anything I did on it. He didn't say, no, this is wrong or anything like that. He loved it. He shared it. Todd and I spoke many times, especially at podcasting events. He really stood up for the podcasting community countless times, even making some enemies along the way because of his advocacy for others. But he cared more for the podcasters to build their own platforms. Todd was the one I would frequently think about when I would tell podcasters like you that you don't need the voice of angels to be successful. And Todd fully owned that he didn't have a radio voice, but that didn't stop him. In his own podcast, Todd was all about his ohana, which is a Hawaiian term for family. And he loved his real and podcast family very much. It was while he was visiting family in Washington that a blood clot reached his lungs, and the doctor's best efforts were not able to save him. Sadly, while Todd was always friendly toward Christians and people of any faith and any background, I don't believe he knew Jesus. But if you listening now want to know about Jesus, then I would be happy to talk with you. I know that's kind of weird for me to say in an episode like this, but please reach out if you want to know more. The podcasting industry lost a great pioneer who helped drive many innovations, many standards, and helped countless podcasters to launch and grow. Through his more than 2,000 episodes of Geek News Central, New Media Show, and Podcast Insider, and several other podcasts about podcasting that he's launched or been part of, through his podcasting companies, Raw Voice and Blueberry, through Blueberry's involvement in defining the IAB podcast measurement guidelines that so many companies use, thanks to a lot of the stuff that Blueberry had developed, and that was thanks to Todd's leadership, through his teaching, through his podcast, through conferences, through conversations, through his freely serving the community with PowerPress for WordPress, and through his leadership and advocacy in the podcasting industry. I will greatly miss my friend Todd Cochrane. All his laughter, all his insights, his leadership, and most of all, his friendship. And I think it's very fitting to end this special with his own words that can inspire. They inspire me, they can inspire you, and other podcasters too.
I am not the best orator. I still destroy the English language. I'm still a nerd. I'm still a techie, and I like giving my perspective. But I think one thing that we have to understand is that podcasting is today because of RSS and no gatekeepers, which has allowed people like you and I to create content without asking anyone's permission and doing it our way. I just think back to all the moments, and we've shared a lot together over all these years. And I do say we, because you are Ohana, you are family here. And I am definitely not the best podcaster out there. I'm not a Joe Rogan, nor will I ever be. But what I am is a guy that grew up in the country with humble beginnings, high school education followed by a bachelor's degree late in life on a field that I'm not even working in right now, and one that definitely destroys English words on a regular basis. And by God, if I can do it, if I can do this and succeed, anyone can.